So, Jos,
hello.
here we are.
Here we
Hello,
are.
how are you doing?
Away from each other, miles away from each other, stuck on one screen.
Yes. So I'm in London,
I'm
in sunny London, and you're in France.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, we've known each other rather a long time.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, I'm just curious. Well, do you remember what year it was and where we did meet, in fact?
Oh, yes, of course. That was in Paris. We were doing a workshop together with,
Yes.
we were doing a playing workshop with Philippe Gaulier.
Yes.
And it was the summer or September, and Ben Keaton was on that one too.
That's right.
And all sorts of other people were there that we stayed in touch with through all those years.
That's right, 1987.
All right, you actually looked at that. Wow.
I did actually, one of the few things I've remembered over the years. I know, but it just seems, it's just sort of an amazing, to think back of how we were playing at that time. It was a director's course as well as leisure, I think we were doing.
Yes, it was a director's course. You get it right. I was wrong.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes, and with Monika Pagneux teaching, and we hopped around in the mornings, and then Philippe would tell us to get off the stage in the afternoon.
Yes, a very influential moment that was for me.
Yes.
And many things that happened there are still happening for me, are still working, are still motoring inside me. It was an extraordinary experience to teach, to be with that man, with Philippe Gaulier, after having done 2 years of Lecoq, where I was in a state of curiosity and non-comprehension almost for 2 years, the way Lecoq operated. And then you were with Gaulier, and he was stimulating you as you were there and then. He was not letting you go. Lecoq would let you wander off and ponder and be lost. And would hold you to the ground. And it was the combination of those two things was very, very formative, actually.
Yes. Yes. Where did you, before we met? So I remember you as part, that's Complicité is just before then, in the early 80s. So is that your first, was that your first venture onto the stage?
Yes, well, Complicité was, no, I've done some sort of theatre workshops when I was at university, and I dropped out of university because of that. I was so utterly and totally convinced and passionate about doing that. I couldn't wait for another 2 or 3 years. But I have not been on stage, like in front of a proper audience, paying tickets in a theatre night after night after night. So I've done, I've been done all sorts of weird alternative theatre projects and all that, and at university level, but not professionally, no. And then, sorry?
No, I was just going to say, you never imagined, I was thinking about my own past at the beginning. I wanted to be a theatre designer first because I was told I was a very bad actor. So I knew acting was never going to work for me. But then when I discovered I could do mime and physical theatre, it opened up this possibility of all the work I've done since. But I wonder if that was true for you, that you didn't really know what theatre was until you discover this other thing, this other way of venturing in front of a public. Yes.
I never was in touch because of where I grew up, and in the countryside, far away from big cities. I was never connected with theatre in the sense of it being plays that were performed with stories and characters, like Shakespeare, Molière, and all that. So when I started to see it, when I went to university, it was already in the late 70s, early 80s, yes, late 70s. We were already in that very moment of hybrid clashing of forms, where we saw Pina Bausch, and we saw, then called the Performance Group, later becoming the Worcester Group, and Steven Berkhoff with his mixture of mime and text. All these things exploded on my retina. And what I knew was that I wanted to get my hands on this way of, I wanted to make things like that. It didn't really matter that much then. What it certainly wasn't, it was not doing plays with characters and stories, but to be on a stage in front of an audience, or to make stuff for people on a stage that involve movement,
Yes.
and already in that time all sorts of video effect and movie and dance and music and live music and electronic music, all that stuff was hyper stimulating, and I just wanted to get my hands on it, and I had no time to. I was not going to do an audition, or no, not an audition. I was not going to do an entry exam to one of the conservatories where you know that 600 people do that as well, and you stand no chance of getting in because they only take 20. So I went to, and that takes 5 years, and I went to where the shortest cut was Lecoq. You know, they took you when you paid, when you had some experience, and it was only 2 years.
And I think it's always about making rather than playing. The playing came afterwards, but in a way, I think it's the making that drove you and drove me at the beginning.
Oh, totally. And also with Simon and Marcello, we make stuff, but we would then remake it and make it again and unmake it a bit and think about the next thing we would make. And Lecoq is a school for makers, you know. So that was our background. That's in our veins. And to be and little by little, like you, I think, which is one of the reasons we're maybe talking together, that we ended up talking on this occasion together, is because we were always as much, if not more, fascinated by what it was, all this making, rather than what it was about.
Didn't we make a show which was called "What Is All This Dancing"?
Yes, exactly. What is all this dancing? Yes, and many things we did, I'm very proud we did, were way off the mark, and we went off piste and fell off our skis straight away. But there were important bruises.
Yes.
You know.
Well, we managed to still got back on our feet.
Oh, somehow we did, and then we got back on our hands. You know, and then.
Yes.
But this love and this fascination at the same time for everything that was visual and everything that moved and was moving has always been much stronger, although I am very much in love with language and literature. It was not necessarily the thing I wanted to make, you know.
Yes, it's an influence rather than the thing that drives it. But just come back to, we always come back to movement. We always within the play and within the making, we're always talking about movement. And I think you always, we learned very, particularly at that time we spent together with Monika and Philippe, that we were fascinated by the way the body moved in space. And that obviously is true of the work with Lecoq. But that took us to Moshe Feldenkrais. Yes. And what was it about? We both did the professional training back in the early 90s. Yes. But I wonder what was it for you that meant that Feldenkrais also, because in a way it's got nothing to do with theatre, it has everything to do with movement, but how you related that to theatre?
What I remember was that when I did Lecoq, and even before theatre workshops, there was movement involved. And part of what Monika Pagneux did, it was double. One was the extreme liveliness and richness she brought to the playfulness of the body. She made us into players, reactive, vigilant, and rich, and curious, and detailed players. And the other thing she did was something that I felt was fundamentally different from anything else we ever did in terms of movement. And I became very curious about that. And it happened to be, and we both ended up from different angles doing workshops with Garrett Newell in London like that. And we linked, you and I, around that very strongly. We felt that we wanted to pursue this together, this curiosity about what it was that we were doing. And I had some back pain issues when I was doing a workshop. I think it was even in that workshop that we did together. And Monika sent me to this lady in Paris. And there, all of a sudden, I was lying on the floor with an accountant and with a school teacher and with people who are not at all involved with theater. And that was the second shock about this. This was not about theater. This was even more profound, that all these people from different walks of life were doing this very attentive and studied series of movements and entered this process of learning through movement, and not learning for movement, and or not learning in order to produce movement, but through movement. And it was so exciting and so fascinating that then when we ended up working in London, I went to Garrett, and you, for other reasons, we went together. And then the more we did it, the more we wanted it. And there we were, we did a training program. And again, I remember, not so that we could become Feldenkrais practitioners, but so that we learned more and more and investigated more and more. And when the show that's hanging behind your head,
Yes.
Quatre Mains, was a direct consequence of that.
Yes. Yes, here you are. This is you being a very nice, here I'll point at you, being a very nice young man, and me as a very nice young man.
Looking like Piers
But
Brosnan.
in a way, oh God, what a curse. But I think that work, that show we did some years after, I mean, and also I think after we'd studied with Feldenkrais, but I think what happened with that method and with that movement, that when you have that shared experience of moving on the floor, but not literally together, you're having your own experience. You might be right next to each other, but you're both having a very individual experience of a very essence of what it is to move, even a small part of you as well, where there's a big part. You actually, when you stand up, you have this shared, incredible shared experience that is unspoken, which is beyond, literally beyond words, beyond mime, beyond anything, but in very fundamental. And I think when we explored Quatre Mains, we really, we couldn't help ourselves but fall into that experience. You know, I mean, before we had played with the table of the stage, we had made, you had directed Space Panorama on me, where I did the moon landing. So we had a little experience of using a constraint, using a black cloth table as a constraint. So we enjoyed that limitation to expand our creativity. But maybe you can say a little bit about what that experience of making Quatre Mains was like, about how it evolved, how the work sort of.
Well, we discovered a language. We were both, again, linked by a fascination that had nothing to do with theater, which was standing in the street in the middle of Brussels and wondering about the moon and the stars and space travel. And our imaginations would go to these places that are so extraordinarily mysterious and incomprehensible and fascinating. And again, to want to talk about it, was to want to do something about that, was one thing. And then, of course, discovering a way to do this just on a kitchen table was another exciting moment. And I don't know where these things come from, and I don't want to create sort of myths around it, but I just remember that was another shared moment of playfulness together.
We were just saying about having a sort of extraordinary moment of discovering the table and Feldenkrais.
And then we would go to art galleries and walk around and be interested in abstract art and say, and choreography and dance. We say, little by little, all these things came together in this play, which was a play for four hands, where we were investigating this and that and this and that you can do just by the quality of our attention, or during the quality of our movement with our hands. We guide the quality of attention of the audience to different places, to imaginary places, to concrete places, to places of touch, to places of time. And this constraint, yes, of course, made us very creative. We found a way to dance together without being dancers. We found a way to mime without being mimes. We evoked our love for cinema by using big movie music. And there were so many things converging all the time. And that's what it is. I mean, you have a creative meeting with someone, and you don't have many in one lifetime. And one certainly was with you, us two together behind that table, and just literally sensing the audience's attention being like stuck to our hands. and at the same time being somewhere else, was a very powerful experience. And some of these experiences, like the first show I did with Complicité and Quatre Mains that I did with you, there are not many of those, are experiences that sometimes I wish I could have again, because I still do a lot of theater and make a lot of theater. And even in the Art of Laughter, which is a sort of, ongoing hit show, I don't have that existential and profound connection. Maybe, yes, when I did the Beckett's with Marcello as well, where I said, I can do this again and again and never tire of it. Never tire.
You must have experienced that a little bit with Peter Brook, though, the experience with Peter Brook of sure, his ability to kind of cut away all the rubbish and the crap, get down to the essence. Isn't that the essence of what he's in his years now?
Say that what he cuts away is rubbish and crap, but that is not the way. If something can be taken away and what you want to do still stands, then it maybe, you know what I mean? It has no place there, and then you take a little bit else away. It is the joy of refining something, and
choices, something. And making choices. Absolutely, it's really tuning in your choices. So
and then you end up with what, and that's certainly what Lecoq said, and what we're still teaching at Lecoq. The theater is first and foremost, and always be, and will end if it is not anymore, the actor.
Yeah.
It is the actor. It is the storyteller, it is the mover, it is the person. You can push some tables away and take the pictures off the wall and put some friends or invite an audience on the couch, and you start moving, and there you are. You create theater. You are doing that thing, that extraordinary thing that I love so much, which is theater. And with Peter as well, you had this sense of refining, reducing, simplifying, till a certain moment, and he would put the bar so high so that you could never reach it. So you were always looking for it. And bizarrely, the audience is unconsciously maybe looking for that as well. Say, well, here are 3 words, and I'm going to say them, and there they are, and I've said them. And
in the little film I've made for the Mime Festival that you've had some input in, that I made with my son, that from this poem by David White. But it relates to what you're saying, the book of always, this idea of always arriving, but never, the poem's called Close, but you'll never quite get there. You're always arriving, you're always searching. Yes. And in a way, I think that's the essence of that magic of when that theatre really, really works, is when you always have that tantalizing moment of not quite finishing. So there's always a question. Yes. So the audience is always somehow tantalized, always left with something to go out into their world with. And somehow they're changed by their experience.
They certainly are touched
with you in that space.
Yes. And that is, there is a sense of shared space and a sense of the present, and there are a myriad of other tiny little signifiers that you have in terms of temperature, breathing, space, dilating pupils, tiny little moment of swallowing that is shared, that you don't have when you have something presented on a flat screen that we are now looking at. And that's a totally different art,
I know, and that's where we're in this strange, bizarre world we find ourselves in, where we're not performing live or not being able to in the same way. I think when we come back to it, maybe we will learn something very profound from this experience about how vital the live experience is.
Totally. I read an interview with a man who never gives interviews, with Murakami, the Japanese writer, in a French newspaper just yesterday, where he says he thinks it's a good thing that libraries and bookshops are closed for a while, so that we really start to feel how important books are for us. and therefore, in a sort of perverse way, we could also think it's a good thing, maybe, that we say, oh, when they open again, we know so much better why we go to these places.
Yeah, well, it's an opportunity we have to turn the negative into a positive, one way or another, I think.
There is one.
But also interested in interested in the experience. So just let's stay in live theatre, because it's really a nice place to be, to dream of being in that place. But I made a show called Absence and Presence that you also worked on with me for a little bit. But I was thinking not so much of the absence, but more of the presence, and how in the space, how we are present in time, and how we exist in that time, whether the past and the future, and how that affects at that moment when we're in the theatre.
There is, for me, like when we did like a Feldenkrais awareness through movement lesson, there is a moment of prise de conscience, like they say in French, of becoming aware together, all at the same time. Not about, again, what this is about, but that all this is happening right now. Only the present can evoke the absent, you know, even if the absent never existed and his name is Hamlet, you know. And the present are there, and it's more than just the play. There is a ritual, there is the space. There is one, Sarah Rule, who is a fantastically inspiring New York playwright, mentioned this as well, that it's not just about the play, it's also about the play, the space and the ritual, the going to the theater, the waiting to go in, the choosing your seat, the applause, the conversations when you go out, lingering in the bar. This is all part of that experience. There is one theater director in France who decided, even when theaters could open again, to not open his theater if that meant people could not meet and sit together and drink together. Yeah. Because that for him, made the theater, the show, really into a product only.
Yeah.
And it is not a product. Like a film is, you don't connect with others, you are just buying popcorn, and when somebody leaves a movie or comes back in, you don't care. And again, that is, the film is another trance. But here we're talking about live performing and moving. And also, when we were talking about that earlier in one of our earlier conversations, that we now move with an older body, or with a more mature body, or with a more sensitive body, or with a body that does not need to move so much anymore, you know, that gets there quicker. There is something graceful about older people moving, because they cut away, like you say, all the crap and all the unnecessary movements.
Yeah. I remember that Pina Bausch show, where you saw the same show with the young people. Yes. And then you went out and had dinner and then saw the same show again, exactly the same choreography with old people. It was the most extraordinary experience of seeing, seeing that directly in front of you.
And one of the most wonderful memories I have from flamenco is a few housewives and elderly ladies dancing in the streets of Seville. And they had the grace, and there was something extra about it. It was more alive than the thin and, you know, and cast dancers and the hair and the glamour. And we saw things, yes.
And we had that wonderful experience of seeing Polifka. Do you remember seeing Polifka?
Yes,
I think we were in Prague. When he was hanging, he stood on the front of the stage, this little old guy, and there was a little butterfly on a piece of wire from his toe, a little paper butterfly. And then he flipped upside down and hung off the butterfly. I remember we were amazed. And then the curtains opened, and these two guys are holding him up on some sort of crane contraption.
And I remember seeing that show, Dama na Balconi, for 2 hours and 15 minutes in Czech, without subtitles, and we weren't bored for a minute. And you know, screw the subtitles and the subtitles. We got it.
Tell that to the opera fanatics.
Something in us was more alive. I remember we're doing a workshop, a LIMF workshop with Lecoq, and there was a man from Albania who spoke only a bit of English, and somebody was systematically translating. And at a certain moment, Lecoq says, "Stop," he says, "stop doing this. You know, you are interfering with his attention. Something in him will learn, and learn even better than all of you who understand what is being said." And we dropped it. and he made the most fantastic things, and he was looking.
Yeah.
And sometimes there were conversations after the show, but not simultaneously during the workshop, but not simultaneously as Lecoq spoke. And that was another
just fill in little details afterwards in a way, just to help. But
yes, there is so much going on that what is being said, especially in the way Lecoq teaches, is just a small part of that.
Yeah,
not the main part.
And I think it's fascinating when you make the work, especially when we made, particularly in Quatre Mains and pieces like that, that are very, where the essence of movement is very important, that I was always surprised, that I think as you were, that people would tell us stories about what they've seen that we hadn't planned. So we didn't know they were seeing, they see other pictures and their pictures are completely accurate and right, but not the same as the next person. So the people are having their individual experiences, which is also a unique experience of theatre, especially of visual and physical theatre.
And in this conversation, of course, we are aware that we are doing this for the Mime Festival, and that was a platform from the beginning that has allowed us to do these things.
Yeah.
And where we also saw Polivka for the first time, and that was not mime. Yes, he was miming as we was moving. He was talking there, and it wouldn't it not be for the Mime Festival? These things wouldn't have come to me, not to you, not to so many people. The variety of languages that we have discovered and that we were permitted to put on the stage there was,
if it wasn't for the Mime Festival, I might have got a proper job.
Yeah, exactly.
I might have worked in a bank or something. That would have been,
Yes.
But I'm just curious about that live experience, and when it comes to, because with the Right Size and with Complicité, we did a lot of comedy. Yes. We tend to not go to the comic and the slapstick together.
No,
that's
with Complicité, we dig into big themes. Powerful themes, and find ways to address these things. With the Right Size, the fascinating thing about them was the only commission, the only thing is they gotta laugh from beginning to end. Easy to say, not easy done, certainly not when it's not just a strung together set of jokes, And a language was necessary to get to, and then you hit on themes. They all of a sudden jump at you. You didn't think it was going to be about that,
Would you say that time with the Right Side was basically your college work that led to the Art of Laughter in a way? That's where you did all the learning about?
Absolutely.
Art of Laughter came out of that.
Yeah, Art of Laughter. Laughter is a fantastic word to get audiences in the theater. So it is actually, if I would have called the show The Art of Moving, nobody would have come, So,
no.
Of course, I was again fascinated by what and not what it meant. When I got to work with the Right Size, we got to work with people like Johnny Hutch, old musical star who says it's all in the little moves, guys, and he did that, and there was a bit of music, and you had this perfectly constructed. I was so fascinated by the engineering of it, the way that you again and again. It's very, very hard to make something that makes an audience laugh from beginning to end and touch them at the end,
And thinking of the magic of Buster Keaton in that sense.
Totally.
Those guys were just geniuses, in their time. It doesn't look like much. In a way, we go, oh yeah, it's
it goes so far. It needs so much craft. It needs so much patience. You need to so many times pick yourself up again when they didn't laugh. The sense of pacing it, the rhythm of it, the way that in your writing, it needs to alternate, the way that, after 20 minutes, whatever you do, something sags. So how do you get out of it? And what do you do in your last 5 minutes? So there is a shock, an epiphany, something that says, this is about something much more than laughter. Laughter is the door through which you come to touch on these mysteries about relationships between men, the mysteries of loneliness. These are very strong themes. But the interesting thing with the Right Size is that we would be interested in a situation like the two hostages in Beirut and see what we would do with it, you know. And then all sorts of themes appeared. It was absolutely, again, the making of these things was euphoric and glorious. And again, things, I was not on stage, but during the making of it, again, I had this sense of, can this please go on and on and on forever? The making of these things with these guys was so utterly enjoyable and inspiring.
So you work now with many companies across Europe. You pop in and you direct shows and you advise on other shows. Some shows you spend a long time with, some you spend a short time with, I think, you know, where you've have your experience. What do you think, after all that, the sort of lessons you've learned that are, when you first go in, do you think, oh, let's think about the timing, or let's think about the space, or where do you go to first when you look at a piece for the first time?
Well, there's two things. There's things that I do for myself because I like doing them, and that is not a very known fact, is mostly music theater. And I like to do it also my way with people, with you know, when I say music theater, I mean contemporary music. I don't mean operas that are already written. There's enough people doing Mozart operas, so I don't want to add myself to it. But to start with a composer from nothing and to construct something till it is on the stage, or to pick up some of those wonderfully crazy contemporary composers from the 70s, like Stockhausen and Maurizio Kagel, and to collaborate with a composer like Georges Aperghis, who I made 4 shows with. To be in a live musical environment is what I love most. I sometimes bring my comedy experience in it, sometimes not at all. It's the most fantastic, for me, the most inspiring place to be. I'm preparing an opera for Opéra in Cannes, to the Bouffe du Nord. I'm in one in Rennes from next week. I made one with a young composer, Colombian composer, Violeta Cruz, for the Opera in Lille and for the Opéra Comique in Paris. That's not on my curriculum. When people talk about me, they say, oh, he's the guy who did The Art of Laughter, or who worked with Complicité. But it is at Complicité that I picked up my taste for and pursued for the first time my taste for, my desire to make musical theater together with Gerard McBurney. When we made The Phantom Violin, when we made Out of a House Walked a Man, etc. And the second thing is companies that invite me to work with them, and then the first thing I do is to see where these artists are and what they want to do. So I am not going to put my print on it. I want to be serving this, you know, and that's a wonderful play. I'm doing this for a company in Switzerland right now. And I'm there, and my experience and my knowledge in how to construct something on a devised basis helps them. My natural inventiveness helps them, but if they drop these ideas, that's fine with me too. And my experience as a director helps them. At the end, when the director is finalizing his project or her project, I say, maybe that. I like to be, you know, it's a very wonderful and comfortable position to be in, because I'm not signing it off. I'm not the ultimate person responsible. And yet the person who is responsible is very happy that I'm there. Behind every successful director stand all sorts of other very talented and inspiring people, you know. So
it's like you're supporting, you're supporting a supporting experienced brain in a way.
Yes,
you know, who sees things and also seeing things when they're going a little off the rails and go, well, hang on, guys, we need to bring it back a bit.
There are 3 moments to help them with. One is brainstorming it. It can be over 3 days, can be over a weekend, can be just an afternoon. Then is actually fleshing it out, you know, starting to put things on the floor and constructing things and sort of telling them maybe that can link with that later, maybe your writing can go this way, and then finalizing it. That's when it is done. You say, well, this makes sense, or this stops making sense there. Only the proof of theater is always when you go in front of the audience.
Yeah.
That's when you
always need an audience.
Yes, you need an audience to say this is too long, or this was only funny for us, you know.
Yeah. especially with comedy, because it's very, very disturbing to be funny only for you. When you find out that it's not funny at all.
The comedy is paratroopers. You know, you need to be tough. You need to go in front of the audience quick. Don't work too long. Go there soon. Learn from them, and then also, you know, pick yourself up when they knock you down. But I don't like comedy when it's defensive. When it's shut all the doors, you can't get in. You will laugh no matter. You need to be vulnerable at some level, or fragile at some level. You need to let the
and invited somehow.
Oh,
you're somehow invited in.
Yes. It's paradoxical.
So what do you? And
yes.
If you're in terms of making. We always talk about making work together. We never quite get round to the next thing yet because we're not in the same city, but we will. But I wonder where and what that might look like. What sort of games we might want to play these days.
We've already done a few sessions together over the last 2 years around certain themes, and what I'm sure of two things. We will do this. When and how, okay, you know, we'll find out. That's not the important point, but we will. And things are maturing. And what I know it will be shockingly simple. You know, it shall be so that that somehow people say it was only that, yet it was all that at the same time.
Yes, we cut away all the chat.
Yeah, to strip away things and say,
I lost you for a second. Oh, you're back.
With grace and elegance, you can go to there and let it hang for longer. You know.
You might just have to repeat that.
That we together in a room and say, here we are. We have this time. There will be an audience then, and look with what elegance we can get there. Quicker and hang there longer, you know. Yeah. And again, it will be a research into something. We'll ask ourselves, what's going on here between us and this audience? And how do we follow this through? And, you know, how can we dance with this tomorrow? You know, I don't like to revisit things. And sometimes I say, what happened if we do that again? But I think we've already spent some time together preparing something, and the occasion will present itself. And
yes,
the intensity of the shared moment will be certainly even more than before.
Yes, we had a very nice few days in Paris in Lecoq's, in his atelier in the Lecoq school in the LIMF. Looking at drawings and sculptures and fiddling with bits of paper and cardboard, and
as we do,
and we have no idea what this is.
And then when we get really lost, we visit an art gallery, you know, or we go to an exhibition. There is always, you see, when you ask yourself these questions and you're preparing the compost, you know, some seed will fall on it. You cannot guess the plant that's going to come out of that yet, but then. Yeah. All of a sudden we say, okay, that we know, that has roots, that we can.
And you hook on to something, don't you? And there's some ideas that we talked about then. I know will come back round.
Yes,
and I think part of this.
There's always those that inspire us. There will always be
part of this.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, and part of this. Well, I think part of the skill of it's where we touched on earlier in the creative process is always having your antennae out for whatever a good idea is. I mean, there's no such thing really, but in the sense that you have a little meeting of minds, you hook onto something, but your antennae is always out for it, and you never know when it's going to turn up and bite you, you know. And lots of things fall away, some things come back. It was interesting when Roman, my son, and I started work on the film. But one of the very first images is of me on standing on something with the camera circling, And we then left that idea, and then we come back to make it, and we ended up back there again. So, and we didn't know what it was at the beginning, and then that's it. And I find that that creative process of playing and editing and everything has value until it's not in the show, in a way, you know, until eventually it's just by the side of the way it just goes on the verges.
Yes.
But you never know when it's a good idea.
And what we have always been, in that sense, more than anything else, as poets. A poem is something that looks for somebody who finds the key. Do you know what I mean? A poem does not say, here's the key. There's many keys to a poem.
No, you're just looking for many keys.
Yeah.
Yes, in a way that's the way the show exists.
Yeah. We are much more poetic and lyrical with all this than actual communicators, storytellers, touchers on themes, debaters, starting a dialogue about whatever the planet and society. There has always been a sort of distance, you know, as if we're both on the moon looking down at it all.
Yeah.
A playfulness about it. Yeah.
And hopefully then the work then exists in that little beautiful space between us as the creators and makers and the audience. And we can't say it's not for them or for us, but it's in for that space.
That I will always cherish and defend, especially in the way we work together, is that it is very, very, very light. That lightness, it will be very, very light. Very light. Yeah.
Excellent.
Just flash paper. Poof. Just that.
Gossamer.
Gossamer.
Okay, on that note. I think that's a very nice light note to end our little conversation, and I look forward to continuing it in person over a very nice Belgian beer.
As we shall.
Excellent.
See you, Andy.
Bye. See you, Jos.